event of the Harvard Buddhist Community 2021 Buddhism and Race Speaker Series. We will begin in a short minute. We're just waiting for people to flood in. All right. So I'll do a short introduction and we'll jump right into the event since we have a lot to go through today. Welcome to the final event in the 2021 Buddhism and Race Speaker Series, which is organized by Harvard Buddhist Community, a student club at Harvard Divinity School. My name is Lee. I am a member of the Buddhism and Race Planning Committee, calling in today from Seattle, Washington State, which is the traditional land of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish people past and present. Short intro of the conference. So since 2015, our annual Buddhism and Race Conference has brought together sangha leader, activist, scholar, and student from diverse backgrounds to build capacity in addressing power at the intersection of race, gender, sexuality, and class in our community. And this year, because of the pandemic, the conference has been reimagined as a speaker series with monthly event, virtual event from January until August. And tonight is the last event in our series. It is a panel discussion composed of representatives from 3 US-based BIPOC-led center, Dharma Center. They will explore and reflect upon the success, difficulty, ongoing complexity, and emerging surprise of creating BIPOC-led and BIPOC-focused practice and healing community within the United States. And just some logistical stuff. So you can support these 3 centers we'll post their link in the description and we'll remind you at the end too. So we encourage you to support these 3 centers today as they are all in need of financial support. And Kyla will help me put the link in the chat below for you to check them out. If you are signed on into our webinar, closed captioning is available. We are recording the event tonight and we'll make it publicly available on our YouTube page. So before I introduce our moderator, Larry Yang, today, I am excited to say we have about 200 people signing in and more people joining every minute. And we are so glad to have you here tonight. We will keep the chat open throughout this presentation. If you want your message to go to everyone, make sure you are sending your chat messages to all panelists and attendees. And please know that any hateful or violent speech in the chat won't be tolerated, and we might choose to remove participants from the event. So if you want to engage in the chat, or if you don't feel supportive with the chat, please know that link to any important resource that sent in the chat will be follow up with an email. And we are also posting instruction on how to disable the chat feature in the chat. And the structure of the panel tonight, Larry will help moderate about 2 or 3 questions for 40 minutes with the representative, and we will have 40 minutes for Q&A after that. Also 40 minutes in the beginning for the center to introduce themselves too. So 3 different parts there. Without further ado, it's my honor to introduce Larry Yang, who will be moderating our panel tonight. He is one of the founding teachers of both East Bay Meditation Center in Oakland and Insight Community of the Desert, and was previously on Teacher Council of Spirit Rock Meditation Center for 10 years. Larry is currently a senior advisor in mindfulness and healing justice for the Catalyst Foundation to provide grant supporting community-based mindfulness and awareness practices for racially diverse multicultural group and organization. Welcome, Larry. We are so honored to have you back to help us with this panel.
Thank you, Liam, and all of our Harvard hosts. It is my privilege and honor to be part of this discussion and this panel, and I'm thrilled to be able to introduce them. My pronouns are he, him, and his, and I'm calling from the land of the Agua Caliente Band of the Cahuilla Indian Nation in Southern California. And I am really honored to introduce these group of people who I call friends, colleagues, and practitioners on a spiritual path together. And so what I'd like to do is introduce each of the centers and also the people here who are representing them. And I'll start with the community that has grown most recently, and that is from the South Side of Chicago. The Southside Liberation Center is committed to spiritual, emotional, and cultural psychological health in the South Side of Chicago, offering classes in meditation, yoga, capoeira, nutrition, Ifa, Tai Chi, internal alchemy, Qigong, dance, fetal health support, wellness, and positive parenting. Joshua B. Alafia is one of the co-directors of Southside Liberation Center, along with Dr. Camilla Alfred. And I have known Joshua from the days of the early POC retreats in the early 2000s. And so that's over 16 years ago, Joshua. And in 1989, Joshua began his meditation practice when his mother gave him a mantra to work with, and he has practiced different forms from the Hawaiian shamanic to the Hindu, Sufi, Dzogchen, Taoist, and Vipassana traditions. In 2010, wanting to bring the Vipassana practice to young people and youth, he began teaching mindfulness to the incarcerated, court-involved, and system-vulnerable youth through New York's Lineage Project. He graduated from the Community Dharma Leaders Training through Spirit Rock and has taught in many corporate centers at New York Insight, Brooklyn Zen, EBMC, public schools and universities, and recently co-taught a 10-day retreat entitled Liberating the Heart, Dismantling Oppression at the Dhammadena Retreat Center in Southern California. He is also a filmmaker and has a 7-year-old son, whom I hope is watching, Joshua. So welcome. And so next we go across the country to the Pacific Northwest. Gathering Roots Wellness provides a place and space for Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities to heal intergenerational trauma and to celebrate culture. We heal through communal wellness learning, mindfulness, ancestral land practices, artistic and cultural sharing. Our work follows the path laid by Harriet Tubman, Black femme activist tradition thriving for self, community, and in resistance of oppression. And with community support, Gathering Roots Wellness was able to make the largest land purchase by Black people in Washington state history for this particular project. And it's so inspiring. So Tracy Stewart is one of the directors and leaders of the project. She is a mindfulness-based mental health therapist at the Niles Edge Wellness Collective and activist in Seattle. She currently serves on the board of SURGE, a BIPOC-centered reproductive justice organization, and as well as Buddhist Peace Fellowship, BPF, Seattle, and has served on 3 social justice fund giving projects. She sees her role in community as working to create supportive, safe space for BIPOC folks in discovering their gifts through mindfulness and social justice awareness. I love this quote that she has placed in this description. My focus is learning to be a good elder in order to support those in the community fighting for all us to be. In my work, I see a lot of suffering of Black and brown folks who are worn from fighting to be their full selves. With Gathering Roots, the intention is creating a space where that burden can be released. People can fill their cups with joyful learning and the beauty of the earth witnessed and empowered to be all that they can be. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Tracy. And Nikki Châu was born in Vietnam and immigrated to the US as a child refugee and inheritor of the legacy of colonial and war violence in Southeast Asia. She comes from a land of fog wrapping around pine trees in the morning, hilly streets, coffee trees, and avocado trees in her grandmother's front yard. Her work as a designer and community organizer is anchored in anti-oppression, anti-racist work, and her major indulges includes cats and durian, which I love too. So welcome both Nikki and Tracy to our conversation. And close to my heart, founded in a celebration of diversity, equity, and radical inclusivity and justice, East Bay Meditation Center opened its doors in downtown Oakland in 2007. Over the past 15 years, EBMC has been extensively studied, praised, and looked to for modeling in how to create a Dharma community that serves and empowers historically excluded groups. It has operated on a system of gift economics, removing financial barriers to all of its programs, and is evolving a shared leadership model rooted in reducing conflict aversion and increasing skills of how to be with difference in a dynamic, emergent strategy-based ways. And the two people with us from EBMC are, the first is Mushim Patricia Ikeda. She is a Buddhist and secular mindfulness teacher and core teacher at EBMC. She has worked extensively with BIPOC Buddhist groups and has authored articles on Buddhist equity and inclusion published in various anthologies, as well as media such as Lion's Roar, Buddha Dharma, and Tricycle. And if I can take my liberties, over 20 years ago, when meeting Mushim at a Dharma talk by Ralph Steele at the Berkeley Zen Center, and feeling so completely bonded with each other, we said to each other, quote, "It would be nice to work on a project, wouldn't it?" Unquote. Little did I know that that project would be called life. So, and then the other person joining us from EBMC is Raúl Coronado, who began meditating in 2007. When he enrolled in EBMC's meditation class for beginners for people of color. A graduate of several long-term programs, including EBMC's Commit to Dharma and Spirit Rock's Dedicated Practitioners Program, Raúl recently finished a 3.5-year term on the EBMC's Leadership Sangha, which is their board of directors, serving as co-chair and then chair for the last 2 years. He is a professor of ethnic studies at UC Berkeley and author of A World Not to Come, A History of Latino Writing and Print Culture, and was recently awarded several fellowships, including the Guggenheim and one from the Huntington Library. And I'm telling you, Harvard people, you better watch out. And his teaching and research focus on how communities of color, especially communities of color and queer people, in the past have left their traces of their soul through writing. And in that way, seeks to integrate into his teaching and research Buddhist principles of presence, no self, and impermanence. So please welcome all of these incredibly experienced and engaged activists in our in our Dharma communities. And I would invite each center to take a few minutes just to introduce themselves, talk about the priorities, whether it's from an overview of past, present, and future. And maybe what we'll do is just begin in the order that I spoke about. I invite Joshua from Southside Liberation Center. We'll move to Gathering Roots and then EBMC.
Okay, I need permission to share my video, please. It's not letting me. Okay. Thank you so much, Larry. And yes, these introductions filled my heart as well. I noticed someone said that in the chat. I moved to Chicago from Brooklyn thinking that it would be for short term 4 years ago. And immediately my instinct was to try and create community through Dharma. And I started working as a healing artist, doing Thai yoga massage. And I started really becoming aware of how much trauma there is here and how incredibly powerful the healing movement is here as well. It goes back to the civil rights movement. Dr. Alvinia Fulton was a nutritionist who was very impactful, I should say, in the community and bringing people into healthy diet and detoxing. And she was, and I came in contact with Dr. Camila Alford, who's a naturopath and has a little vegan soul food restaurant called Good Foods. And she was a disciple of Alvinia. And she started giving me all these clients for massage, and we really hit it off. She's not here because she said she wanted to be in the background. I would have loved for her to be here as well. And the seeds of creating a center started being cultivated in both of our hearts, I feel. I worked at the Haji Healing Salon, which is a beautiful healing and wellness center, very similar to what we're doing. Aya Cook is the founder of it, and it started in her living room. So we have these traditions of grassroots healing and wellness movements here in Chicago. And I once asked someone, why is there so much vegan soul food in Chicago? And the response was, because people in the civil rights movement were trying to live. So piggybacking on those ancestors and creating continuity with them, I saw that there was also a need for some things wider than what we were doing at Haji. We needed more youth engagement. We really needed to help, I felt like, young parents. There was a lot of fetal trauma I was coming into contact with. And I'd been really interested in this, I think, ever since I became a parent. How do we help other young parents who are struggling and perhaps haven't had the modeling that they could? How do we help them be at their best and most generous and patient with their children? We need community for that. And I started a fathers group in Brooklyn, but it was only like my friends, like all the really young fathers, like in their 20s, that I would come across in my neighborhood. They'd be really excited about it, but they never come. And so I started feeling like, well, maybe we should give them stipends, So with the generous support we've received in creating this center, it started on Zoom with really a lot of healing artists offering classes on Zoom. And we just signed the deed for our building, which is on 8801 South Stony Island Avenue, and 88th Southside, 4,000 square feet. It used to be a dentist's office, and totally forgot. I've got visuals. So these are, let me share my screen. Hold on. Okay, so starting out, we're looking at some of the flyers for our BIPOC group that meets on Wednesdays. Let me move this. Okay. And, you know, originally I had this idea that it would be funny to place Siddhartha's, this version of, this very Afrocentric, perhaps, version of Siddhartha. I feel like he looked like this. Place him on all these iconic, and here's a South African Buddha that Larry actually introduced me to on community Dharma leaders. But to place these pictures over iconic photos was funny. So again, we're bringing in parents and working with nutrition. Here's one of our artists, Chandra, coming with nutrition. This is one of our Ifa teachers, priestess of Oshun, Yadidra. Yeah, this is Frank, Zen Frank. So just here we are at the new space, and it's needs a lot of work for sure, but it's bought and paid for. So it's a real blessing, such a blessing. Has a big backyard, huge backyard that we're gonna renovate and have grass. There's space on the side for a greenhouse so we can grow food and have really want to have a urban farming program for teenagers. And yeah, it's just really a dream come true. And we're so thankful. This is a Mindfulness 101 flyer and more parent flyers. Some of these are raw files that I would use to promote. Yeah. So it's the engagement of a lot of healing artists. Some of them are from Chicago and have moved, and they've been holding down the Zoom classes. It's pranayama with Toussaint Haki, who's actually in Oakland now. Yeah. All right. So thank you. I'm really honored to be with y'all today, and I really look forward to the conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joshua. And I would invite Tracy and Nikki to share about Gathering Roots.
Thank you so much. I first want to say that I am really honored to be on a panel with Larry and Mushim. I have to fangirl a little bit because I love you both and have appreciated your mentorship through this process, deep gratitude and appreciation. So Gathering Roots came about. What we're doing is not new, as Joshua just laid the groundwork for. First, thanks and praise to ancestors known and unknown that have laid these paths for us, and the heritage Buddhists who've been practicing Buddhism in the United States without recognition for always, before it became popularized in the 70s. Our work is in the tradition of healing justice, Black and Brown queer folks and disabled folks who either did not have access to Westernized medicine or was shunned by Westernized medicine, and went to a place of creating mutual aid and care for one another. And in creating and founding Gathering Roots together, our idea was trying to create a place where BIPOC folks could comfortably learn about the Dharma, meditate, do yoga retreats. And then we were like, oh, why stop there? A place where people can learn about food solidarity, learn how to grow food from an ancestral perspective with no-till organic farming. And then that food would feed the retreat center and feed the community and teach community how to grow their own food on the rooftops, on their window sills, in the strips along their streets, like all the things, all the things. And we knew that if we could purchase a place that we could grow into, not only for our immediate community, but for all BIPOC practitioners across the country, to have a space that is specifically for and by us for retreats, without asking for permission, without asking for scholarships, without asking for relegation to second billing, blah, blah, blah. We just wanted a place where people could just come be their whole selves and learn with and by and for each other. And so we started that work in 2019, and we continue now. And our work at this moment is decolonizing all the things because nonprofit law is excruciatingly, painfully colonized. It is not meant for us. The way it's written is very punitive. Like, as we're looking at bylaws and policies and procedures, they're just all like, who talks like this? Why would you write it like this? And so we've looked to EBMC and East Bay Real Estate Collective and other collective organizations to rework the languaging of all the things that we do. And it's been a challenge because everything is so incredibly colonialized. So I'll stop there so that Nikki has a moment to share her perspective as well. But we are so excited to be in community with other BIPOC practitioners and can't wait for COVID to get under control so y'all can come and jam at our site, your site. Thank you.
Thanks, Tracy. Everything Tracy said, and I just want to say hello to everybody, and also want to share an additional piece, which is that I met Tracy through a Buddhist fellowship, Buddhist Peace Fellowship, and the purpose of me joining Buddhist Peace Fellowship was I am an anti-deportation organizer and decarceral organizer, and that work is extremely exhausting. It's emotionally very taxing. And I was trying to figure out how to lean into my spiritual practice to also do the work that's necessary and not fly into sort of a rage at all of the injustices that I was witnessing. And so because of that background, our organization and our center is also, we have a strong strain of abolition. We have a strong strain of understanding social injustices and social justice. So we don't come at it from just merely learning about Buddhism or learning about Ifa or learning about the land, but we also strive to look at it and approach it with a systemic lens of understanding systemic oppression and how we might address that through our practice. So I'll stop there and pass it back to you, Larry.
Thank you, Tracy and Nikki. And so I invite Raúl and Mushim to introduce EBMC, East Bay Meditation Center in downtown Oakland.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm noticing this is Mushim. My pronoun is she, her, and hers. And I'm located on the land of the Confederated Villages of the Lishan, Oakland, California, in the United States. I'm noticing there are 244 of us together on this Zoom meeting. And I just want to thank each and every one of you. And because of the limitations of Zoom, to just invite you to connect for a moment. I can only see the panelists. I wish I could see all of you. Is to invite you, as my yoga teacher says, to, if you like, just reach out to me and I'm going to reach out to you. And let's touch each other. Yep, there we go. Feel our human connection. A few moments to spend before I turn it over to my colleague Raúl on the past and the physical plant of East Bay Meditation Center. So you can see on the in back of me, this is a visual background of East Bay Meditation Center's space in downtown Oakland, which of course has been closed since the start of the pandemic. It's there waiting for us. And you'll notice above, whoops, the other, my left hand, there I am, I'm pointing to, there's a big banner on the wall to the right of the altar of our agreements for multicultural interactions, which I believe Raúl will speak to. They are, I would say, as a meditation teacher, our most important practices. So perhaps a bit more on those later. And I'm now going to ask Xavier to please start a very small slideshow that I hope you'll enjoy. Here we have one of our logos, East Bay Meditation Center. And then slide 2, please. So now that I've taken your hands, we've entered in through the front doorways of East Bay Meditation Center in downtown Oakland near Lake Merritt. And the first thing that you might see if you're a sighted person is our big welcoming banner. And there are some of our very thriving pandemic plants. We try to have indoor greenery, some Buddha figures, of course. And we hope that this helps to create a warm welcome for everyone and in our spirit of radical inclusivity. As Larry, I think, mentioned, we opened our doors in our first space, which was a one-room storefront, also in downtown Oakland, in January of 2007. We moved to this larger space not too far away in, I believe, 2012. And we were founded to serve historically excluded communities with a Dharma and Buddhist-based practice foundation in order to create a place of belonging, peace, and power. So we are an urban center in one of the most diverse cities in the United States, once again located on the land of the Confederated Villages of the Lishan. Next slide, please. Just taking a moment to just enjoy looking at this somewhat earlier photo of our main temple space. So after coming into the entranceway, you might take off your shoes if you'd like to do so and enter into the main temple space. And here we show a group of people who are enjoying a Dharma talk. And this would actually not be a typical group in terms of access is one of our highest values. And so when we were meeting in person, and hopefully at some point again, we would typically see a very diverse group of people seated on the meditation mats and cushions on the floor or benches, on folding chairs. We also have reclining chairs And we have folks with chronic fatigue, chronic pain, perhaps spinal injury, lying on the floor with supportive cushions, mats, cushions, and blankets. So therefore, we try to, again, in posture, as in all things, encourage people to feel welcome, to feel that you belong. The next slide, please. We'll give you just a little introduction and photo. This might be by our staff member, Candy Martinez-Carthen, of our primary altar. We have altars in all of our rooms in the main temple space. You'll notice that along with Tara, Kuan Yin, and Shakyamuni Buddha, we also have, acknowledging our ancestors, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and the first African American to be ordained as a Buddhist monk in North America, my very dear friend, Bhante Venerable Suhita Dharma. And this will segue naturally to our next slide, which shows that we also have a community altar on which members of our community are welcome to place objects, specifically with a focus of Black Lives Matter, the movement for Black lives, and our ancestors and community members who we wish to raise up, to uplift in our memory and in our practice, so that we bring them into our practice space. Next slide. And here we have a group photo from some years ago of one of our teachers' meetings. We're always trying to bring joy into the work that we do and into our service to our communities. So here we have some staff members, we have teachers, and we really do enjoy being together. The last slide, please, shows you, and I'd just like to be quiet for just a moment and invite you to look. I hope this brings to you the spirit of East Bay Meditation Center. This is one of our family sangha meetings. And I'm a mother also, have worked with a lot of youth in Oakland. Our next generations are incredibly important, as are our elders and everyone in our sangha. And so we want our children to feel so welcome, so safe, and to have so much fun at East Bay Meditation Center. We hope that you can join us. Raúl, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mushim. And thank you, Larry, for being one of the teachers who introduced me to the Dharma, and to EBMC for being the place where my practice began and has continued to unfold. So really grateful and honored and privileged to be here with you all. And we've had the panelists here we've met a couple of times and have had already wonderful conversations. And so really happy to be here with you. So just want to share a little bit about EBMC's present and future, just some information. We've grown a lot. We've moved into a second space, much bigger space, but we've already outgrown that space. And we are now seeking a new home, and are actively working towards that end to have a new home, a new space where we'll be able to do even more programming. But I wanted to point to something that in all this beauty of growth and transformational practice that we do at EBMC, it happens because we also have certain kinds of practices in place, as Mushim referred to. We have certain mechanisms in place and practices that allow us to work through all the diversity of opinions, because in all this beauty that we have at EBMC, there is also so many visions and ways of wanting to do things. And so tensions can arise ways of communicating can arise. And so I wanted to point to some of the things that really have allowed us to not to diminish or dismiss or cover over difficulties or differences, but to really say that working through that and talking through differences and trying to arrive at consensus is really where we're at. And part of that for me has been, part of my practice has been, one of the things that I learned from Larry in his book and his teachings is through the satipatthana and practicing not just internally, that is a mindfulness of body, of breath, of mind, feelings, not just internally, but also externally. And so for me, when I shifted over to the leadership sangha, the board of directors, it was also a really beautiful time commitment for me, but that meant that I was not able to go to some of the regular practice groups that I was going to. But the leadership sangha was a practice group. We were practicing there collectively. And so one of the things that we've done on the board has been instituted from the beginning is that it is a leadership sangha. It is a sangha. We come together and we practice together and we meditate together as a group before we begin our meetings, and we have gratitude practice as well, where we call people and express our gratitude for their contributions in support of EBMC. So wanting to integrate that throughout all of the work that we do at EBMC, it's not as if we have practice groups or long-term programs and then we have staff and then the leadership board that does other work. We see it all as practice. And so some of these mechanisms that we have in place, one of them is that Mushim referred to is a mindfulness-based operating principles. The agreements for multicultural interactions. And all of this information is on our website if you're interested in them. And these are they're posted, as Mushim talked about them, they're posted right there quite openly, and they're really beautiful ways of wanting to engage with one another, allowing people to step up, and those who might speak to a lot, to step back, to become aware and mindful of that. But there are many other agreements in that. But that's just one of the foundational kind of principles at EBMC, to really work into those agreements. In the leadership sangha and on staff, we have another mechanism that's in place, the mindfulness-based operating principles for addressing tension, that in here, where are my notes here, Mushim? They were developed from someone else. Oh, no. Agreements for multicultural interactions was actually adapted and used from Visions Incorporated. I did want to say that. But we have the mindfulness-based operating principles for addressing tension. That is, it allows us to really be able to, there are specific steps involved in wanting to address tensions, differences, and maybe even conflict that emerge, and not wanting to paper over them, but really want to work through them. Another mechanism that we have in place is the ethics, restoration, and resolution process, which is a really detailed process that staff, leadership sangha, teachers are involved when anyone wants to raise, anyone related, connected to EBMC wants to raise a concern that they want addressed. And so we have these mechanisms in place. And one thing that I've learned in working through all of these different steps is that the parami of patience is probably one of the most important paramis, has been one of the most important paramis for me, because often I go into a leadership sangha meeting, a board meeting, and we have the agenda and we have things we have to get done and we have to pass these things. But really practicing patience has been probably one of the most beautiful things, transformational experiences for me, not just in being on the board, but in my own practice, to just be able to let go and to not want to pack things in meetings, but to really allow for topics to be discussed as long as they need to be discussed, as we feel that they need to be discussed. So that might mean that things might not happen in a month. It might take a year for some things to do. And that, in fact, did happen at EBMC. But I would say that's probably one of the things that I've loved so much about EBMC, that there is a sense at various different levels, ways of wanting to get us to push against our comfort level of wanting to interact with others and try new ways of interacting and being with others in community, but also to be able to express those differences when they do arise. And I wanted to highlight those things as a way to conclude with our strategic plan. We developed a 10-year strategic plan in 2018. And part of that strategic plan was a lot of processing, a lot of community meetings, so many stakeholders involved in creating this beautiful vision that was centered around the 5 core elements. And this is also on our website. You can access our strategic plan on our website under resources, and the strategic plan centers around 5 core elements of EBMC, and they are Buddhism and mindfulness teaching programs. So we have several long-term programs. We have our first teacher training program that were launched last year. We have the second core element is that of gift economics, and really pushing into gift economics, even thinking about how we want to solicit grants and how we want to how we think about applying for grants and raising funds for EBMC. The third core element is that of radical inclusivity, which also involves a lot of thoughtful thinking about ways to think about inclusiveness at a variety of levels and a variety of levels at EBMC. The fourth is that of shared leadership, and the leadership training program that we've just created is very much part of that, but also wanting to balance out sense of powers and work and think critically about hierarchies. And we had a very long, thoughtful process, even within the leadership sangha, about officers and how we think about the officers and what kind of work they do and how they relate to other members on the leadership sangha. And then the fifth is that of social justice and healing, and a lot of our programming is very much involved in that. So wanted to conclude then with our capital campaign. We've grown, and so we're now moving on and have launched the capital campaign to raise $5 million, and we're really happy to report that we've raised 20% of that. And we're looking for a new home that will be accessible to as many people as possible. And I believe there's information or links that the Harvard organization has sent out to you all, but there's information on that if you're interested in supporting us at EBMC. So thank you very much. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, really, deepest thanks for the sharings from your communities in both your collective visioning and intentions, that's the internal work, right? And the collective actions that all of you have made, that's the external work, again, connecting the internal and the external. As we move into a more conversational relationship in this session, I was feeling how to frame this, and in a very light way. And the words that I would like to offer is that this exchange might feel both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the sense that as BIPOC communities, for BIPOC communities, we think about these topics all the time, constantly. It permeates our awareness. And extraordinary in the sense that we do not often have the support or the container or even the sense of safety to explore the topics openly together. As with most movements of justice and transformation, it often takes years to reach tangible, felt outcomes. That's the quality of patience that Raúl was just referring to. It always kind of sort of takes longer than we would like. And yet, there are tipping points in which the efforts of the many of us, the many of our communities, the many of our events, and even the many of our generations lead to a momentum forward that is unmistakable. As we gather these 3 BIPOC-led wellness meditation communities together, who are at differing stages of development, evolution, giving us different learnings from that journey, hopefully this is indicative of how our collective efforts in our many different communities are cumulatively transforming us forward into a greater, broader, and deeper sense of freedom and peace. And that's why I feel so privileged to be among you, to share. And these questions that we've all talked about are really meant as seeds for a conversation. And we may go very tangential, and that is absolutely fine, because there are no tangents to something that is as complex and broad as what we're attempting to do, both specifically and together. So I just invite the participants to raise their hand in the Zoom function and jump in when there's a pause. I'll start with the first invitation and invite Nikki and Tracy to mix up the start and get us moving, to provide their first input or response. And this invitation is, how are your multicultural and diverse communities creating freedom and liberation? And what are those spiritual practices that are involved? Because they may be different for each of us.
Nikki, I'm going to ask you to go first.
No problems. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, Tracy. Hi, everybody again. I'm going to share screen. I'm going to share a short presentation on my ancestral and spiritual and cultural practices. So the question is, what are your spiritual practices? At first, I just want to say, I just want to bring my Vietnamese name into the space. My name is Châu Ngọc. And there are so many people in Vietnam. There are 100 million people living in Vietnam, and there are 54 ethnic groups, and several million more in the diaspora. So I'm not going to be able to speak for everybody, or I'm not going to be able to be comprehensive or thorough in this presentation. So I just want to preface that. So my ethnicity is Kinh, again, one of the 54 ethnicities in Vietnam. Kinh in Sino-Vietnamese means capital. It's used to describe the people living in the capital area by the Red River Delta. So you can see here. And today you probably know it as Hanoi. Hanoi literally means inside the river or surrounded by rivers. So we are the people of the rivers. So Buddhism in Vietnam has been shaped by both Sinicization as well as indigenization, as you can see here. So we have influences from both Mahayana from the north and Theravada from south and central. So we have the Khmer Kingdom and the Langsan Kingdoms, presently known as Cambodia and Laos. In the central part here, you can see that it used to be the kingdom of Champa. The Balaman Cham people practice an indigenized form of Hinduism since the 5th century. And this is a map of the spread of Hinduism to Southeast Asia. Cham people also practice Islam. By the 17th century, most Cham royal families had also converted to Islam, and this is the spread of Islam into Southeast Asia. We also have Catholic missionaries coming to Asia, and especially in very organized large scale, starting in the mid-1600s with the Paris Foreign Mission. They often came and preceded European colonization. In the 1920s, a group of Viet people created a syncretic religion called Cao Dai, meaning high tower. There's a strong anti-French colonization character. It's a fusion of Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, Islam, Christianity, and Shinto. So this right here, you can see on the left-hand side, this is from my uncle's shrine in Vietnam. This is the Cao Dai temple that they go to, and this is what it looks like inside. That's my uncle walking towards the temple there. In addition to these religions, so as I mentioned, Ginvik people, we settled by the river and became experts in growing rice. And therefore our customs, rituals, beliefs evolved around living based on agricultural cycles and being dependent on collaboration, as well as being dependent on elements. So we have deities for rain, sun, wind, moon, etc. So you can see here, this is from one of our myths for the god of the mountains and the god of the river and the water. This right here, this is the goddess of rice. This one on the left is Thungmu, which is the god of rain. And on the right-hand side is the story of the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival. That's a person on the moon. So a part of our ancestral worship is really the commemoration of those who have gone before us, both on a familial level and a collective level. We have a strong history of matriarchy and worshiping goddesses. In Vietnamese, it's called Đạo Mẫu. We honor a lot of mythical and semi-mythical figures who are feminine women. And in fact, many of our cultural and spiritual practices are based on mythical stories and the mythical and semi-mythical figures from these stories. So from as an example, one of my personal deities is Lam Tai Hua on the left-hand side here. He's one of the 8 immortals in Taoism. He's sometimes described as a woman and sometimes described as a man. So a lot of gender fluid and non-binary people tend to look at this figure. It's depicted as a young feminine boy carrying a flower basket and playing the flute. On the right-hand side here, this is a screenshot from a very popular series called Journey to the West. In Vietnamese, it's Stay Yu Ki. It's about a pilgrimage of a Buddhist monk who traveled to India to obtain the sacred Buddhist texts. And when I was growing up, we would watch this, and then my parents would use the stories from this to teach my brother and me certain lessons, certain moral lessons. The story really teaches that the journey towards enlightenment is really by the power and virtue of cooperation. Appreciate, and also especially as a decarceral and anti-deportation organizer, an aspect that really resonates with me is the redemptive and the restorative justice aspects of the story. These figures here who are accompanying the monk have done something, and they are traveling on this journey to redeem something that they've done in the past. In fact, Buddhism is so deeply embedded in kind of our everyday life. I just want to show you some examples. So on the left-hand side here, his screenshots from a really popular Vietnamese song right now. And on the first side, he's saying, in this lifetime, unfortunately, we have faded connections, but we don't have a shared binding force. Basically, we don't have a debt with each other. So I'll see you in the next lifetime. So the concept of karma and reincarnation from Buddhism is just really deeply embedded in a part of our culture. On the right-hand side here in the upper corner, you see this is a screenshot from a very popular drama in Vietnamese called Trân Tình. In Chinese is Chan Ting Ling, and it has been viewed over 9.5 billion times. That's right, 9.5 billion times. And the meditation posture here is immediately recognized by us as a way to cultivate energy, as a way to cultivate chi, as a way to cultivate virtues. Maybe some of you can also recognize the falling asleep posture as well for this person. And then on the bottom here, I just want to show you, this is a comic. It is from a comic from a newspaper. This person is saying, Đời là bể khổ. The literal meaning is life is an ocean of suffering. And this is something my mom would say to me quite often. You know, sometimes even like if I am if I have fallen and hurt myself, or if something bad happened, and I didn't even know that it was a Buddhist concept, and I didn't even know that was the first noble truth, that life is suffering, until very much later. Another example is that we celebrate Vulang, the Hungry Ghost Festival, which is coming up in 2 weeks, and we don't even call it Buddhist actually. But Vulang comes from the Ulambana Sutra. If you're familiar with it, it's a Mahayana Sutra concerning filial piety. On the upper right corner here, you can see this is an offering that my mom puts out for hungry ghosts, and her explanation to me is for the spirits who don't have anyone who remember them, who don't have anyone who would remember to give them offerings. And especially in North America, because of the violent history of genocide here, she said there are a lot of indigenous people who had been wrongfully killed, and there's no one who might know who they are and remember them and have an altar for them. So we put out the offerings for all of those spirits. And we call them Wanghong, or resentment spirits. And we put out offerings to pray for their souls, and also so that they can move on to the next realm. On the bottom here is children celebrating the Mid-Autumn Moon Festival. So it's a harvest festival. In our everyday spirituality, we also worship various gods, like the kitchen gods, the land gods, the god of wealth. So you can see here some models in Vietnamese kitchens that have a space for the shrine for the kitchen god. We also believe that there are spirits in all beings, as you might know it as animism. But this is from my hometown in Hoi An in central Vietnam. This is a banyan tree, some offerings there, some flowers and incense, because we're praying to the spirit of the banyan tree. In the US, since we don't always go to a sangha or a temple here because the spaces are not made for us, so our spirituality is very personal. This is Quan Yin. This is in our kitchen. This is a statue of Buddha of a Vietnamese homeless man. This is his tent in a homeless encampment here in Seattle. So we worship and honor really so many beings and so many spirits, and we have altars everywhere, up high, on the floor. So really anyone can participate, even our pets. And finally, to close, I just want to share with you something deeply personal. This is my ancestral altar in Vietnam, in my aunt's home in Vietnam. So we have a saying that humans have two roots, one root in our ancestors and the other root in the descendants. And when we light the incense, we connect the two. We connect the two roots, and we connect all the realms that we exist. So this is the cultural, ancestral, and spiritual practice that I identify with and I come from. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna stop share here and pass it to Tracy.
Deep gratitude. That's so delicious. Thank you so much. So the question is, how do our diverse perspectives create liberation? The freedom to explore with each other, like Nikki's way of practicing is different than my way of practicing. And what's beautiful about that is what we found is through our collective, we have 10 co-leaders in our collective. We work as a worker-led nonprofit, so more like a co-op. And through our conversations and our circle and our retreats together, you know, we've learned where there's these huge crossovers between Buddhism, ancestral practice, Ifa, and it's really rich, and it brings us closer together. So I think the liberation is truly going to that place of all things are possible and letting go of any binary thinking, and reminding ourselves of how colonialism keeps us from ourselves and from each other. And when we have these conversations with each other about how we practice the differences and similarities, it really helps us dig deep into the transformative work of healing intergenerational trauma, which is what our sole purpose is. And that happens through art, it happens through dance, it happens through the variety of programs that we offer to community. We have a plethora of yoga teachers who have very different ways of coming at yoga. We have different meditation teachers. We have an African dance class where all gratitude and respect to Sumaya Diop, who teaches our African dance classes, because she tells people at the beginning of the class, you're not coming here to exercise. You're coming here to learn about my culture and heritage, and you're coming to learn the history of the dance. So she teaches movement, but she talks to people about different parts of West Africa where these dances come from, where the movements come from, and the meaning of the dances. And so there's this deep reverence and connection. Like at the end of each one of her classes, people are like texting us and sending emails. This class was so wonderful. Thank you so much. It just made my day. I felt so connected. I feel so separated from people because of COVID, and Sumaya's class just lifted my heart. And that's the whole point. Our cultural practices are rich. They share stories. They share who we are. They give us the freedom to be who we are. And I have so many thoughts going at the same time, so I have to slow down a little bit. So the liberation is in the coming together and the communality, if that's a word. I'm making it one. For us to be together. And even if we can't be together in person right now, we're dedicated to creating spaces where we can be together, at least online, and where people can slow down, get off the hamster wheel of capitalism, and just witness for each other and support each other in that witnessing and the healing together. So I'll stop there. And if I had to sum it up, I would say that the liberation is in the communal sharing with one another and being who we are, just being who we are without masking in any way, shape, or form. I see you, Mushim.
Yeah, thank you. So I'd like to thank you, Nikki, for that wonderful slideshow, and Tracy for what you've said as well. I'd like to contribute from my point of view how EBMC for the past 16 years has been creating freedom and liberation in the communities that are together form what we call the East Bay Meditation Center Sangha. And so I would say that our Buddhist-based and Dharma practices and teachings are filtered through these two lenses, neither of which are Buddhist. I believe they're both social justice activists. And I would say that if someone could please, maybe Xavier or someone could please just type this into the chat. There are two main practices. Number one is cultural humility. If you like, you can go to YouTube and you'll find posted there a wonderful set of videos from a documentary on cultural humility, which was originally established in the medical profession by two women of color doctors. And the principles of cultural humility, one of the basic principles is you don't tell the communities that you want to serve what you're going to do for them. First, you go to them and ask, what is it that you need the most? How can we serve you? Not that we can do everything. However, there's a kind of a mix there of kind of a Venn diagram, what the communities want and need, and they say that, and then what we can provide, and it's in that middle area then that the magic happens. And that is, I suppose you could call that a major tool of decolonizing and looking to the principles of communities for self-determination. So first is cultural humility, and the second is prefigurative activism. Prefigurative activism. And what that means, as I understand it, is that instead of always being in a reactive stance against, for instance, white supremacy, patriarchy, instead, when we come together, we consciously try to create temporarily in our spaces the worlds in which we wish to live. And so we're creating spaces that have tools for resilience, for joy, for nourishment, for just the enjoyment of being together with people from whom we can learn, and once again, creating that sense of belonging, which people can then take with them, we hope, when they leave an East Bay Meditation Center program, and recreate, help to create in all of the communities which they serve as well, so that there can be a ripple effect.
Thank you. I wanted to, I'm just feeling really in alignment with both of those shares, especially the sense of collectivity and the sense of community. Chicago is really diverse with spiritual traditions. It's really incredibly diverse. The south side of Chicago, we have a very strong Nation of Islam presence. We have a very strong Christian presence. We have Chinatown, so Buddhists and Taoists in Chinatown. We have a Latino community that's very Catholic, and as well as indigenous traditions. The Ifa community is extremely reverent. Like, I went to a Ifa celebration for the Orisha or deity Obatala, and I'd never seen people, the whole room become silent when people were praying. Like, they're saluting the altar, and even the children, like, pin drop silent. I was like, wow. Used to Caribbean people who are like carrying on, and they're so used to it. It's kind of, when you have folks who convert, a lot of times they get really orthodox with things. So there's a kind of feeling of orthodoxy in a lot of the communities here. There's a lot of variant from Nation of Islam. Like, there's the Moors and the Seven Sisters of the Seven Stars. So you have all these different traditions, and in our collectivity and interacting with all these folks, a lot of us work in tandem with one another. Like, Dr. Camila will be giving someone a detox, and she'll be saying, wow, you have a lot of blockage in your liver. Go see Joshua, or go see, Fatima, or one of the other body workers to address the blockage in the body, in the energetic meridians. I often will engage people in the Taoist practice who are working with depression, because it's such a cleanse of the lymphatic system, and it's such a there's so much joy in the practice. It can be very effective for depression. We're very inter-sangha, in that I love the idea of engaging the Buddha Dharma from different traditions, as well as the other Dharma from the other traditions. We don't have yet, but would really like to have like a contemplative Christian meditation class, as well as a contemplative Islamic meditation class. Yeah, we also have the University of Chicago on the south side, which is not far from our center. And so that brings a whole other element, which kind of breaks up the incredible, this has been called one of the most segregated cities in the United States. It's amazingly segregated. So this really creates a dynamic that is not really present in other neighborhoods, having the university that has an international community, as well as a whole lot of white folks who probably wouldn't have been in the South Side perhaps as much if the university wasn't there. Yeah, so I really connected with both of those things that y'all are saying in terms of collective spirit and community liberation. Thank you. Raúl, did you want to come in?
Sure, yeah, thanks, Joshua. Thanks to everyone for your sharings. I wanted to add to this. I had mentioned in my introduction, referred to the Satipatthana, the establishment of mindfulness, and cultivating that practice in various ways externally. We might all be familiar in doing that on, during meditations, our own times when we practice on our own individual, or even in a gathering. But to think about that externally as you're speaking in a meeting or working together, to think that as practice as well has been really eye-opening for me and beautiful. And so thinking about that, but I also wanted to bring in also the Four Noble Truths and the 12 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and ways that, at least for me personally, have been really transformational. And I see it happening at EBMC in different kinds of ways. The 12 aspects being like, the first one is that, there's suffering here. Like, oh, that's suffering. Like, oh, that's suffering. That's painful. And then the second aspect of like knowing that pain. Oh, wow, I feel that in my body in this kind of way. And thinking about pain here, specifically in terms of the various kinds of traumas that we've experienced, whether it be about, race, the way our bodies have been read and interpreted by society and seen as less than and not valued, but feeling really lingering with that question and being and sitting with it and feeling it in our body and really working through that. So, and then the third aspect being like, oh, I felt that. I know what that feels like, the constriction in my chest or the tightness in my belly or the fire and the energy in my arms, and working through that, I think communally, which I've not done, but explicitly as a practice, like calling it out in that kind of way. But I do see it in different kinds of ways at EBMC. Through either the practice groups, through the teachers and their own specific teachings. But for me, I think that's what, thinking about, I guess, again, internally and externally, for me, my practice is really feeling into the body and feeling that pain and thinking about that pain, experiencing and really knowing it, and then thinking socially or relationally with that. I think that's, for me, one way that I think that we are practicing freedom and liberation, that is to really feel into that and then move on and then move from there to the next, the second, third, and fourth noble truths. That's what I wanted to bring. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I just wanted to invite any other comments or maybe responses among yourselves, if you had any, just to create that pause. Please, Nikki.
Thank you, Larry. I want to add that although I come from this really rich tradition of spiritual and cultural practices, coming to the US and being situated in a place, in a space where the assimilation pressure is quite strong, that I also attempted to shed myself, to disconnect myself of my connection to all of the things that I presented to you, right? Because that has been seen in the West as as backwards. Is the denigration of the spirituality of my people was seen as uncivilized, to the point where the French came to Indochina to colonize under the pretext of civilizing us. They call it the mission civilisatrice. Because what we did was seen as superstitious and incompatible with modern life and science. So I think I want to respond to the question of how have you decolonized, or have you created liberation in your practice? And I think it's really, to put it in the Buddhist framework, is understanding dukkha, right? And the origin of dukkha. And understanding these samskaras that have been planted in me, understanding the internalized oppression, and understanding how Orientalism operates. And second, it was learning that under capitalism, mysticism is seen as a commodity. It's commodified. It's a product to be desired. It's a product to be sold. And there's like this muddled, this melange of like Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam. There's a kind of like mystical tourism, like in places like in Bali, in India, where people from the West can sort of experience the East in a kind of exotic, exoticness that the West sees the East. So oftentimes in places like, certain retreat centers that are primarily white owned, white run, you'll see like mindfulness exercises and Ayurvedic medicine and cuisines, and then readings of Rumi all blended together. And so understanding that how capitalism operates to commodify mysticism and how to commodify our spirituality. There's a kind of like this mysticism marketplace almost for people from the West to shop and pick what they want to pick and then use it for whatever they need it for. Understanding that dukkha has also been huge in my personal unlearning and decolonizing as well. So I just want to share that. Thanks.
I just wanted to pick up on that. Nikki and I had a deep conversation about how frank we were going to be in this conversation, and the political correctness that is sort of required of us as BIPOC practitioners in Western Buddhism. And I'm still not sure if I'm going to just call what I want to call, but I'll dance around the edge and see if I get brave. But what I'll say is, I really appreciate you saying that, Nikki. I started practicing in 2008, and I have constantly been questioning why we do it this way. Why do we do it this way? Is this authentic? Where does this come from? And why aren't we questioning this? And my experience of practicing Buddhism with monks and nuns is very different than my experience, and I'm sure those of you who've sat with monks and nuns may understand what I'm saying, is very different than what Western Buddhism is. And one of my favorite teachers, Senabe Seleze, has a series of classes where she talks about putting Buddhism back into Buddhist practice and how to make Buddhism palatable for white Western practice, tons of the practices of Buddhism were taken out for the very reason of they were too mysterious, or, oh, we don't really need to do that part. I don't think people would like that. And so, like, what are we practicing in the United States? Are we actually practicing Buddhism? Ooh, radical question. But that's constantly a pushback that I have about the way we practice here, and the amount of money that is required to practice here. That drives me nuts. And I constantly call that out. And one of the reasons that we wanted to found Gathering Roots is we wanted to have a place for Black and Brown Dharma teachers to go and teach without practitioners having to pay out the nose to go and practice. Why should you have to pay $2,500 to go to a retreat? That is insanity. When if I could, get on a flight, I could go to various parts of Southeast Asia and India and practice, and my worth as a person is my worth as a person. And I sit with a teacher, and my work is to do the work of the practice, but then also to participate in the community there. I don't have to pay them $2,500 to learn the Dharma. And so I said it. I frequently don't say this out loud because it's like there's this, oh, well, we should be grateful. And no, I don't want to have to beg for a scholarship to come and sit with a teacher. I think it's disgusting. And I also think that it is outside of the practice, and it's clearly against what we know of the Buddha, what his intentions were about the practice, that this is meant to be free to everyone. And so if you can support the teacher through working in the monastery, providing food, providing shelter, then you as a human being, because you're a human being, have the right to sit and learn. And it's not based on classism and capitalism. And so there needs to be this space in the United States where we're taking a hardcore look at, why are we charging people $2,500 or more to come to a retreat? Yes, we know that we need to keep the lights on, but I'm not sure if $2,500 per person is a necessity. Are there other ways that we can sit with each other and work with each other to keep the lights on so that it is accessible? Because how are we providing liberation if we're gouging? My other thought is the question in and of itself almost centers whiteness, because Buddhism is not a Western practice. Buddhism is a practice of people of color that was discovered by, not discovered, it was already practiced here by the people of color who practice it in their communities and in their families. And then others decided that the richness of it is awesome sauce, which it is. And so it's, when we talk about Buddhism, some of us do not sit in white sanghas. And so the idea of decolonizing, we're decolonized because we're not sitting in white sanghas, and we're not fighting to be ourselves to learn the Dharma. So decolonization is maybe looking outside of Western, if that's a buzzword, Buddhism. Okay, let's see what happens now.
Thank you. And if I can jump in, Buddhism has been colonized for a really long time, actually. I think a lot of as Larry has elucidated, and a lot of the listings and the quantifying of Buddhism perhaps is a lot different than the revolutionary social movement that Yasodhara and Siddhartha were taking part in. And you mentioned going east. We actually can now hop on a flight to Uganda if you wanted to practice with monks and nuns and go support Bhante Buddharakkhita and his center outside Kampala. You're bringing up something really interesting, I think, and I don't think we're going to have time to really go deep into it, but the economics of who gets the Dharma and the challenges of having, I'm really pushing and trying my best, and so is Dr. Camila, to have a 100% donation center. Now, will this be sustainable? We've been having 100% donation Zooms, and it's been a very low revenue. We really are making much more money selling products, selling detoxes, and those are not by donation. So I'm looking to my elders in the Dharma centers here. How are we working out economics so that everybody gets the Dharma?
Yes, I can jump in on that. Thank you, Joshua. And I'll just say that East Bay Meditation Center decided from before we opened our doors, that we would not have scholarships for the very reason that's been named. And sometimes people write in and they say, hey, can I do like a work trade? And we're like, no, because all of our programs are accessible to you. You don't have to trade anything. Show up, be present, and that's a gift to all of us. So we operate on a system of gift economics, which is an economic system. And sometimes we'll use the word dana, which is the practice of generous giving in Buddhism. We also emphasize gift economics, which is a worldwide movement because it points to the fact that we need to have a system of economics that works for everything to be sustainable, for the meditation center, for the staff, and for the teachers. Raúl, I'm wondering if you would like to say a few words about how gift economics works?
I mean, we have, yeah, no, thanks, Mushim. So in our strategic plan, for example, we have the goal of having 80% of our funding come from individual donors, not from grants, not from corporations, not as incredibly large gifts. And we have planned out in our strategic plan, the 10-year plan, of how to go about doing something like that, increasing. In the last year, for example, I ended my term on the board earlier this year, but we've just for monthly donors in the last year, and I don't have the numbers here. I don't know if you know them, Mushim, yourself, but I know that from even over COVID, we were able to increase the number of monthly donors, and we did have to get informed about the various ways of being able to pay, allowing people to donate funds. And that's taken it's taken patience to incorporate things like PayPal or Zoom or ways for people to be able to give at different practice groups. But definitely being creative and thinking of ways of being able to allow our community to give, and to give in different kinds of ways, in the way that Mushim has been talking about, gift economics being an economy, that it's not just financial, but that there are many different ways that people can give back. And as people have been saying in the chat here, their centers have been open in Santa Cruz. I think someone mentioned that it's been open, the one there has been open for 30 years, and it's all 100% Dana. And so I think mapping out, having a plan and testing and trying and finding ways to give back to, I mean, if it's a center for the community, then the community will be there to show up in different kinds of ways for it. So yeah, Mushim, do you want to say a little bit more about gift economics, different aspects of it at EBMC?
Yes, something very important. Thank you, Raúl. To just wrap it up a little bit quickly, and we invite you to come to our website. We have quite a bit posted about gift economics, which we did not invent. Once again, this is a worldwide movement. It's an alternative to capitalism. So in gift economics, everyone is invited to give financially, and those who can give more are invited to give more than what they might deem the so-called market price for a given program, in order to balance out the sustainability for those who can afford to give less or perhaps nothing at all, due to being unemployed, underemployed, or simply having all of their financial resources tied up in all of the many things that they themselves are supporting. So this is something that requires feedback to the community. Just as Raúl was saying, we make our financial sources of income transparent in terms of the percentage of our income that comes from the community in direct donations. We do not want to be reliant. We're grateful for grants. We don't want to be reliant on them, because we want East Bay Meditation Center to really be a place of power to the people. And we believe that the people have the power to financially sustain, with understanding and with transparency, how to sustain a place that is helpful for all of us.
Thank you, everyone. The suggestion is that we would move into the more open Q&A and begin to involve the audience in this conversation. And so I'm going to turn it over to our Harvard hosts in terms of sequencing and offering those questions.
Thank you for that very rich panel. So now you guys can just use the Q&A function to ask the panelists any question, and we'll filter the question and present them to the panel. So while we wait for everyone to bring the question up, I guess we can start with this one. And the question is, how do you position yourself in terms of affecting change from either within or outside the system, like dominating structure of power?
I couldn't hear that question clearly, Liam, sorry.
Yes, sorry, I'll post it in the chat too, but the question is, how do you position yourself in terms of affecting change from within versus outside dominating structure of power?
I don't. I just don't. I'm about centering BIPOC folks. I'm not worried about anybody else's structures. I work to share power with the community. Like Mushim said earlier, like asking the community, what are your needs and wants? What are your hopes and dreams? How can we help you make that happen? Because we have this space. We have a 78-acre beautiful piece of property with 3 houses on it for you. What do you want to do? Come do that. Come do it. There are no limits because we own it together. So what do you want to do? That is for the BIPOC community throughout the United States. Because we're in the Pacific Northwest, we're here first. So it's for us here first. But, you know, we've got siblings all over the country doing transformative work. So that's who I'm focused on. I'm not worried about anybody's systems. The only way I'm worried about it is if we start to perpetuate it and to call it out, call out our, the colonial mind that might show up. And we do that gently with each other and lovingly through community.
I can respond to this if I'm next in line in the stack. Yeah, okay.
Yes.
I'll respond to this from my experience of doing electoral organizing, actually, because this is a very heated conversation. This is a conversation that's very alive in electoral organizing. Is, do we work from within the system? How do we expect change from the outside? And the lesson that I have learned is from reading Kwame Ture. And Kwame Ture said, in dialectics, everything contains positive and negative. And this is very sort of Taoist as well. And Kwame Ture said reforms can be used to advance revolution or to forestall revolution. If you study dialectics, dialectic materialism, dialectics said that when the negative dominates the positive in reform, then it becomes an obstacle to the road to freedom. And when that happens, it must give way to revolution. So that is where I always direct people to when they have this question, is I direct people to Kwame Ture and what he said about dialectics. Thanks.
I think this is a hard question. It seems related to one of the questions that someone posed here about being in an almost all white sangha, there's a lot of questions down here, but I saw a question about that, like how do you address an all white sangha, and trying to address questions of diversity and inclusivity. I mean, I think for me, finding refuge in community and finding, so I mean, I guess I'm saying it's related because the way, I love the way Tracy and Nikki both answered this, that I don't think of myself affecting change within or outside dominant structures. In many ways, for me, the practice really begins with, you know, with the mindfulness of this body and this body of where it is and in relationship to what is next to it. And so proceeding like slowly and carefully out from there, because if I start thinking of me and outside, it becomes so cerebral and so abstract and conceptual that I kind of lose the grounding in this body here and in the body next to me and the person who's next to me. So I prefer to think in those kinds of ways, but I think it is really about, for that person who is trying to address the lack of diversity in their own sangha, finding other, you know, refuge in other like-minded folks in that sangha. And then maybe finding that you need to create your own sangha, right? Wondering, asking whether the pain and dukkha and suffering that's involved in wanting to address this other sangha, that where the leadership, as the questioner said, is not wanting to or not willing to or able to address inclusivity, maybe doing that on your own. And there's definitely, at least from here, the resources that will be sent out, connections through the email that will be sent out later, so many resources available in ways of going about doing that.
Yeah, and I would say, if I can jump in, if you're in a Dharma center and you're white folks and you don't have a BIPOC night, seek a BIPOC teacher and bring the community to your center, because unless there are, you know, I mean, it's there's imbalance happening, major imbalance, if that is not happening, you know. So for instance, the Brooklyn Zen Center went across their tradition to include Sebene and as people of color and allies group that was coming from Theravada tradition. So it was this is inter-sangha. We don't have to just stay in our tradition always to really open up. I mean, that's the spirit of the original Dharma, is complete fusion, you know. Cultural fusion.
Great, thank you so much for that. Our next question is, would any of you be up for speaking about the relationship or the line between the consumption and appropriation of practices and the development of new practices or adaptations for new contexts or current needs? And we'll post that into the chat as well.
When I think about adaptation, I think about the Buddhist teachings on bringing your wisdom and understanding that you may receive a teaching and it may not make sense to you from your cultural worldview, right? And that people have always infused their cultural worldview into Buddhism. And one really rad thing that's happening, that has been happening in the United States, is Afro-Buddhism and having some really deep brothers like Larry and sisters like Larry Ward, yeah, who is one of my favorite teachers. If any of you have not listened to his teachings, I highly recommend it. He is in the lineage of Thich Nhat Hanh and studied with Thich Nhat Hanh, has a couple of PhDs, maybe 3 or 4 in Buddhist studies. But the looking at the liberation movements and black power movements and how where they intersect with Buddhist liberation theory, which has been just really empowering for so many people. And there are so many people, too many to name, that are part of that movement, including Reverend Angel and Lama Rod Owens and Joshua. And there's I'd say about 100 teachers in the United States, Black Dharma teachers in the United States, that when we're fortunate, get together all in one place and have some really deep chats about this movement. If you are able to come across recordings of the Black Dharma gatherings, I would highly recommend that. But that's my worldview. And the bringing in Joshua mentioned Ifa practice. There is a wonderful book. I can't remember what it's called. I'm so sorry. I'll link it here. But about the relationship between Ifa and Buddhism and where they intersect in so many places. It's a wonderful literature.
Just chiming in on the Afro-Buddhism, if you're wondering what that looks like, we're bringing like call and response in, and ritualized healing, community healing, where someone will speak and the facilitator will sing a phrase that's encapsulating what they heard, and then the sangha can come in and sing. It's very powerful. So there's the gospel of Yasodhara and Siddhartha is growing. It's in its just embryonic phase right now, but it's growing. This expression.
I can respond to the issue of appropriation. I want to echo what Tracy said, that Buddhism, wherever that it was has been introduced, has always merged with or accommodated whatever the indigenous spiritual practice of the region is, as I kind of mentioned in my slides earlier. But in terms of appropriation, I think that the true issue is power dynamics and profit motives. And that's usually where, and I think the word cultural appropriation kind of sends people sideways, because cultural is quite subjective, and people would also spin it to, well, it's appreciation, not appropriation. But usually when we talk about power dynamics, we're talking about a system that's historically based, right? And it's institutionally perpetuated. And whenever that there's an asymmetric power dynamics where one side subjugates the other for the purpose of maintaining its wealth, status, and power in a capitalist society, that's really what we're talking about in terms of power dynamics, right? And because in a capitalist society, anything and everything can be assigned an economic value and commodified, as I mentioned earlier with the mystical marketplace. And in this case, if it's spirituality, then that's what it is. If it's Buddhism, if it's Ifa, then that's the thing that gets commodified, right? And so what happens is that the process of theft, really, but we call it cultural appropriation, is first the thing is devalued, right? So like the spiritual practices become denigrated. It becomes it's seen as backwards, as I mentioned, is all of the Orientalist aspects of it. Then it's seen as something that if you do it, then you're seen as barbaric and you're not modern, you're not sophisticated. And then the people from the culture that says that it's barbaric then take it and then associate it with a value that's higher than the value that they have given to it, which is the devaluation of that culture. And so the process of appropriation means first you devalue the thing, then you take it, and then you say, well, that's because we are the people who are civilized, we are the modern people, the thing that we do, therefore, is modern. The thing that we do is therefore necessarily improved, is elevated, it's sophisticated. And now we're going to sell it back to you. And that's the process of appropriation. And so there's the analysis of both the relationship to capital, relationship to profit motives, and relationship to power that we have to consider when we talk about appropriation. Thanks.
Something that I think is perhaps interesting to consider is once again referring to the Buddhist practice, and I'm sure it's present in other spiritual traditions as well, of patience, which I interpret as being able to watch as things unfold when that's appropriate to do so, having a sense of the something that's developmental. Again, the theme of including families has been such a wonderful theme here in this discussion. And so for those of us who've had the honor of being with human beings from scratch, as I say, infants and babies and toddlers and growing up to teenagers and young adults, we see all these developmental stages and wonderful ways in which at the right time we're able to absorb new learnings and grow and discover. So that my observation is that for many people who are encountering the Buddha Dharma here in the United States and in North America, that many people come, if they're not from Buddhist families, they come because of course, their suffering, their individual suffering, their collective suffering, the multi-generational suffering. Why else really would someone come in order to practice? And therefore we honor that by trying to provide practice spaces to meet people where they are and to try to meet those immediate needs with practices that are very, very helpful, such as unconditional loving kindness, metta or maitri. And then my observation is that for those practitioners who are able to ground themselves in these dharmic practices and teachings that help to alleviate their suffering and their community suffering to some extent, but their own suffering, that they might then begin to inquire more about the roots of the Buddha Dharma and of Buddhism, and to do a deeper dive into Buddhism as it's come to us from Asia and as it has manifested in Asia and other parts of the world in the past and in the present. And that is, I think, pointing to that development can point to how, for me, cultural appropriation is consumeristic. It's about saying like, oh, I like kind of like this and that, and I like this and that, so I'm just going to take it without acknowledgement from the root cultures or out of context and put it all together. That's understandable in some ways. And to go deeper, as we go deeper into respectfully entering the cultures from which Buddhism came and is still being vigorously practiced, we will encounter many things that we do not like at all, that we disagree with, that we might find misogynistic, homophobic, unjust, so on and so forth. And it's in that very passionate journey that there's the possibility for so much growth and development in deeper ways.
I just wanted to highlight there, Mushim, I really love your share, and I think you said what really struck me was when talking about the practice, creating these practice groups, the affinity practice groups. So at EBMC, we have the Alphabet Sangha, the LGBTQI Sangha, BIPOC Sangha, different sanghas. But really, it's allowing them having patience, sometimes often with no agenda, but to come together and to practice and to trust that from there, the collectivity from the experience of being together in community, that what needs to lift up, what needs to be discussed or dealt with or celebrated will emerge, and to have the patience for that to arise. And I think for me, that's been the most beautiful thing to do, to allow that to happen, crucially through practice, I think, right? And being mindful in the various kinds of ways, internally, externally, gratitude, generosity, the 10 paramis, going back to those teachings, but always being grounded in like the body and in the community, the bodies around you, not just the human bodies, but the various ways that we imagine our community. And I think for me, it's being in touch with that without needing to an end goal of like, we're going to end up doing this. Maybe that might be the guiding point, but it's really about, for me, what I've loved about ABMC, it's about here, right now, this is the way it is. And that there's been really a lot of beauty that has been able to, a lot of beauty, a lot of dukkha. And then the beauty arising out of the result of like, yeah, that's dukkha, let's deal with that dukkha. So thanks, Mushim.
It's 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows, right?
Awesome. If you are done with that question, the next one on the list is there a designation more inclusive than BIPOC for those who find the term limiting, but clearly do not feel part of the white sangha?
I think Betsy answered that in the chat.
Great, thank you. I guess another question is, so beside the economic question of why we need to pay $2,500 to access the Dharma in the West, what other core issues or questions that American Buddhism need to take a hard look at in your point of view?
Everyday living, the suffering of all of the vestiges of colonialism and capitalism and what that creates. So it's the day-to-day communalness, it's the day-to-day witnessing of each other and validating each other's lived experience rather than gaslighting the lived experience of each other. When we're gaslighted by systems within which we move, having a space to lay down that burden and to celebrate our cultural joys, like all of them. And I say that a lot, but I literally mean all of them because they are what has and will sustain us. So I'll stop there because I could ramble on for about an hour.
Just a quick answer to the chat. Betsy's answer was people of the global majority instead of BIPOC. That's what she suggested.
Thank you all. I just wanted to lift up another question from the Q&A from Rhonda. Rhonda writes, I really think this question of resources is important. Who can afford the Dharma, etc.? How do we engage in gift economics in and with under-resourced communities, especially with the real wealth gaps and concrete ways that racial capitalism shows up? I am thinking about Tracy and Joshua's statements side by side. How do we bridge those concerns and realities? Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to that. I would just urge those of you who kind of have the passion to think small. That's part of prefigurative activism. So for instance, an example of prefigurative activism in Oakland is occasionally pre-pandemic, and we'll get back there again at some point, there would be some community acupuncturists who would announce that for like maybe 3 hours on a certain day, they would set up chairs on a certain block, and people could come, first serve, and get free acupuncture. To just give people the taste of, again, we're creating in a temporary way the feeling of the world in which we want to live, where these resources are available to all, and it's on the street, and people can be part of it and be part of that happiness. So something that I like to share is that when East Bay Meditation Center opened our doors on this one-room storefront, we had 2 all-gender bathrooms and a little office space, and that was it. That was it. In 2007, that Larry and I were part of a 6-person leadership sangha, aka board of directors, and some of us, many of us were teachers, and we also did everything with a lot of love. We did not have a garbage and recycling contract. So when we met at the center for board of directors meetings, those of us who had cars would take the garbage and the recycling home in our cars until we got and use our own cans until we got a contract. One of the chairs of the board of directors would come with his hand tools and put in shelves in the office, and go to Costco or Sam's Club and bring bottled water and things that we wanted to be able to offer to our sangha when people were still doing bottled water. And we just didn't let anything stop us. We didn't feel that we had to be some big fancy place with a very elaborate infrastructure. We took what we had, and we, as one Zen Buddhist priest I know said, things become respectable when we respect them. So if all you have is a handful of Costco chairs and a few other things, and a cardboard box to create your altar, we can do that with love and respect, and we can work up from there. Traleg Rinpoche, a Tibetan teacher, says again on the practice of patience, patience is refusing to be defeated. So we're not just sitting on our butts waiting around for something to develop. We're just like, we refuse to be defeated. We're going to do this.
Thank you so much for that. And a bit related to the question we just asked previously, in terms of what Buddhist wisdom do you all lean to in support of BIPOC-focused practice, and especially healing around money, especially in terms of the ideas of enoughness and not enoughness?
I think a lot of us, many of us, I should say, come from the trauma of poverty and, lack mentality. And so that that has affected our gift economics, I think, significantly. So it's a great question, and it's one that I haven't completely figured a solution to. But I think that as people start practicing and start kind of moving towards the wholesome, a lot of the practices kind of a spiritual maturity where the inner teenager is not just rejecting and reacting to everything and wanting to just ride the motorcycle without the helmet and act wild. No offense, people who don't wear helmets. But there's this movement towards the wholesome, moment by moment. There's this alignment with that which liberates, and clinging to our any kind of abundance that we might be experiencing is not liberating at all. So I think, the generous heart is cultivated. I think metta is super, super important for this. I think it gives a taste of interbeing, as well as relational mindfulness exercises, I think, are very powerful. I think that they share the spirit of the relationality that was experienced by the original monks and nuns, having to go beg alms and really interact with community. So yeah, I think these are some things that I feel have really helped in that transformation.
I find the Brahma Viharas and metta and gratitude practices are very heart-filling and connecting. But to be perfectly frank, for me, just whenever I practice with MCPS here in Seattle, Mindfulness Community of Puget Sound, shout out to Genevieve and all the siblings there, but it's just a joy to be in space with one another. And it almost doesn't matter what part of the Dharma we're talking about. It's rich, it's good, it's beautiful, and it sustains me through the week.
I mean, it seems, Mushim, see if you can add to this as well, but it seems like at some point we really had to practice explicitly take on the parami of generosity and dana, and thinking about that mindfully. How do we talk about this with our sangha here at EBMC? Different ways of talking about giving, different ways of talking about it, but also of different ways of giving back to our sangha to be able to sustain it. And I think having and then here I'm thinking about my own experience in this in the leadership sangha, we grappled with that. We talked about it. We thought about it as a practice, and I think that was a really beautiful way for us to think about this, not just about finances and numbers, but really about caring for our community in different ways that people could care for it, and letting that be an organic kind of process for your own community, for your own sangha, for how you want to sustain that community. I think for me, that's been a really beautiful one, to go a difficult one, but also because I was like, oh, I hate giving these calls and calling people and thanking them. But I've come to really love practicing that. And we had a whole script when we call people and thanking them for giving to EBMC. But I came to really love doing that. I really love talking to people and expressing my gratitude for what they're doing for EBMC. And so I gave up the script. And I think and I think that's something that has rippled and continues through the El Sangha. But I'm sure that that's happened in different ways, Mushim, at EBMC, and through the Teachers Council and other sanghas at EBMC. But that's just one example in ways that you can sort of lean. I don't think there's one answer, and I guess in other words to this question, but or the answer would be organically and really working through in your own sangha how you want to address the question of dana and generosity and what it means for your community, how they might be able to give back.
Yes, thank you so much. I mean, something that has been brought forward by so many people is that the practice of generous giving, called dana, D-A-N-A, in this tradition, and I'm sure it's in probably most, if not all, spiritual traditions. The practice of generous giving is good for the donor. It's good for the one who gives. Why? Because it brings us happiness and joy. And as Joshua said, it leads us in the direction of the wholesome. That the more we give, the more we, and it doesn't have to be to our meditation center. We're talking now about the practice of generosity itself. And the more generous that we can be, even experimentally, we might just think, well, you know, I'm going to challenge myself to be more generous. And then we can find out it feels so good. It feels so good to contribute to organizations with values whose values align to us. It feels so good to give a helping hand to people in our community who are in need, the whole mutual aid effort that came forward during the pandemic. It feels good to the donor, and it is good for the donor. And that is based in a philosophy and an understanding that we do live in abundance. We do live in abundance. I have been poor. I had a monastic practice which required complete renunciation. So I have practiced under a vow of poverty that was very serious. And I became very poor in terms of money. However, I was so rich in spiritual friends and in love and in my baby, which I gave birth to right at the end of that monastic time. So much abundance came out of that I now really understand how much richness is around me in many different dimensions. And that's the promise of the practice.
For me, the greatest teaching that I get from Buddhism and practicing Buddhism is the technology of understanding my samskara, is the practice of recognizing that when I put enough space between the observer, the seer, me, and my suffering, I can break it down. I can recognize the source and how my oppression or how my suffering operates. And I can figure out a way to get out of that suffering. I can understand that there is a nirodha, the cessation, but nirodha it's from the Sanskrit, the Pali root word rod, right? Which some etymologists, English is my third language, so sometimes I struggle. There's the theory that says nirodha root is also the radical for root, and it's taking things by the roots. So if I apply that technology to sort of personal suffering, I could also apply that technology to collective suffering. And I could also apply that technology to understanding all of the conditions and the factors that contribute to our collective suffering. Meaning I can look at how Buddhism, when it comes to the US, how it merges or how it takes on individualism, how it takes on liberalism, and it assumes that this is an individualized practice. And I can go down that route, and I can see how the assumption that this is an individual practice, an individualized practice, gets sort of co-opted or gets weaponized, so that the blame is on the person. I saw a comment in the chat about the climate report, right? So the onus is now on us, to drive less or to consume differently, etc. But the onus is not on like the 75 corporations that pollute the most. The onus is not on the US military, which continues to pollute and dumps toxins into Asia Pacific and has 800 bases around the world and continues to encircle Asia Pacific and wanting to put more military bases, especially on Vietnam right now. That's why Kamala Harris is in Vietnam. I can understand the roots and the sources of suffering when I look deep into how, for example, we've been talking quite a bit about racial capitalism. I can read Black Marxism and I can see what Cedric Robinson has said about how that operates. And I can then figure out what I can do to uproot it. So to me, that practice from Buddhism has been invaluable, to just recognize that if I allow myself some space, meaning to meditate, to cultivate, and then observe the field of suffering, then I can figure out with the community, with the collective, a way out. Thanks.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you, all the panelists. That is unfortunately the closing of this wonderful panel. We ran out of time. So our team will make some ending statement regarding the series, and we'll invite everyone to read a dedication mirror together. So again, thank you all for joining us in the 8th and final event in our series. It has been an incredible 8 months with you all. Whether this was the first Buddhism and Race event you attend or your 8, we're on the planning committee are grateful for your support from our audience and of course our amazing speaker. We could never have foreseen just how far the speaker series would have reached, nor how it would inspire us and so many others.
Racism is the issue of our time, and it is our dharmic duty to do something about it. We've explored this issue in various ways in our speaker events, but truly this entire series only really scratches the surface of what can and should be done. And there is more to learn and certainly even more steps to be taken.
Influenced by our own participation in this series, the 4 of us on the planning committee are in the beginning stages of developing a student-led course at HDS around decolonizing Buddhist studies, as well as an anti-racist working group for community engagement and greater activism. We are continuing this 8-month-long conversation together with concrete action steps, and we encourage you all to continue and/or seek out ways to participate in the radical reorientation of the Dharma, moving beyond racial integration towards decolonized and anti-racist practices and communities.
Some of you may be new to this work, and some of you have many decades of practice and involvement. We are so grateful to be in community with all of you. The work of liberation is collective. None of us are free until all of us are free. We invite you to take a moment now to think of a commitment you want to make to support change in yourself and/or your community. And if you feel comfortable, we encourage you right now to share one of these commitments in the chat as an opportunity to rejoice in our collective. So we'll just pause for a moment to give you space to think about commitments you may want to make and perhaps share them with others. And as you consider that, we also want to share that we believe strongly in supporting racial justice, not only with our words, but also with our actions. This month, we encourage you to donate to the 3 centers represented on today's panel as a way to support and also to express gratitude and generosity through Dana to these centers and their work. The links will be available in the chat and will also be sent in a follow-up email after the event. And we will now turn it back to Raúl to begin the dedication of merit.
I believe the words will be shared with you all. This is Dedication of Merit chapter near the end of Shantideva's classic text, Bodhi Arya Vapara, Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. So we'll be reading this collective. May all beings everywhere, plagued with sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of our merit.
May those feeble with cold find warmth. May those oppressed with heat be cooled by the boundless waters that pour forth from the great clouds of the Bodhisattva's merits.
May the rains of lava, blazing stones and weapons, from now on become a rain of flowers. And may all battling with weapons, from now on, be a playful exchange of flowers.
May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and the delicious drinks.
May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find new hope, constant happiness and prosperity.
May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting one another.
May all travelers find happiness everywhere they go, and without any effort, may they accomplish whatever they set out to do.
May those who sail in ships and boats obtain whatever they wish for, and having safely returned to the shore, may they joyfully unite with their relatives.
May troubled wanderers who have lost their way meet with fellow travelers, and without any fear of thieves and tigers. May their going be easy without any fatigue.
May all embodied creatures uninterruptedly hear the sound of Dharma issuing from birds and trees, beams of light, and even space itself.
For as long as space endures, for as long as living beings remain, until then, may we too abide to dispel the misery of the world.
Thank you all so much for joining us. And this has been a pleasure to have all of you join us for 8 months now. And thank you so much to our speakers, our great moderator, and everyone truly.
Thank you so much, everybody. Keep shining your light.